Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's office hours. Today, we're going to be talking about what it looks like when an organization transitions from UCM or another phone system to Microsoft Teams or Webex, and what needs to happen in Infratel so that that data can continue flowing in for reporting. We'll keep today's conversation pretty high level, and I'm going to focus on what customers should expect when information ISI needs ahead of time, what the implementation process looks like, any common roadblocks, as well as what customers may want to review after the transition. To help walk us through, I'm joined by Katie Gassmann, Professional Services Team Lead. Katie brings years of implementation experience at ISI and leads the team that helps customers through this transition process. She has a strong understanding of what customers' needs and uses that experience to help them make that transition as smooth as possible. So, Katie, thank you, as always, for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam. Happy to be here. Yeah, so this is actually a really great topic because phone system transitions can have several moving pieces. From the professional services side, my goal today is to help our customers understand what needs to happen in their ISI tenant before, during, and after that transition. The main thing to remember is that when phone systems change, the ISI tenant needs to be updated so we can continue receiving that information, just like you said.
All right, well, let's start with the big picture then. When a customer moves from UCM or say like another phone system, let's say like they're going to move to Microsoft Teams or WebEx, what does that mean from an ISI tenant perspective?
Sure. So at a high level, the tenant needs to be configured to receive that data from the new system. We can only report on the data sources that are currently configured and actively sending data over into the application. So when a customer changes platforms, we need to make sure that that new data source is properly set up. That review of the setup could look like setting up the Teams or WebEx connection, configuring the appropriate directory source if that's applicable to the project, reviewing any queue needs if that's also applicable, validating the data, making sure that it's flowing after the connection is configured, and also reviewing any report configurations that may need to change to that new data source. It's also...
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
It's also pretty important to remember that it's not always a one-for-one swap. So some of that data that you were used to seeing in UCM, for example, Microsoft Teams and WebEx provide that data maybe a little differently. So that setup and available data may vary by platform.
Got it. That's an interesting way to frame it. It's actually pretty helpful. So the key point is that when the phone system changes, Infratel needs the right configuration in place so that the new data can flow into the application. I guess at this point, then we should just talk about like how the customers get that process started.
Yeah, absolutely. So customers should let us know as soon as they're aware of the change. So the transition process will ultimately, it could involve our sales team. So having that awareness ahead of time and letting us know is our best option. They can reach out to the support team, to their customer success contact, or a professional services team member if you've worked with them previously, and we can help get that conversation rolling. Even if you are early in the migration, in the planning stage for changing those phone systems, it's better to get that conversation started sooner rather than when that cutover process is close.
No, that makes sense. So the customers don't need to know like exactly per se who to contact first. They can actually reach out to any ISI team member that they maybe have worked with in the past, and they can help them get to the right people, or get the right people involved. So yeah, once that conversation starts, then I guess what information does ISI need to understand the project? Sure.
So the more detail that our customers can provide us up front, the better. So some information that would be helpful is, what your current phone system is, what the new phone system is, an expected migration or cutover date, and whether or not you're planning to move those users over in a phased approach or all at once. Having that information will really help us ensure that we get the right information up front, have the project scoped, and we understand your timeline so we can work alongside that as well.
Okay. So that's a pretty clear list. So the more that ISI understands the customer's current environment, the new platform, say any timeline reporting needs, the better we can plan that transition. So once that information is gathered in scope, what does the implementation process look like?
So that implementation process is actually pretty straightforward. We would go about configuring the new data source connection, connecting that new platform. We call it a connector. It's a cloud-to-cloud connection, so it's a pretty quick setup. If there's any sort of directory source, we configure that as well. Any queues, if that's part of the project, we can make sure that all of the queues are syncing into the application and you have the ability to license them. We'll validate that data flow, make sure that the data is coming in as expected, and it looks good to the customer as well. Depending on that cutoff date or migration date, we can also deactivate your old system. So say if you're moving from CUCM to Webex and all of those CUCM users have been moved over to Webex, and you no longer need that CUCM data source active in the system, we can go ahead and deactivate that. And if you are getting a new access to a new portion of our product, we can do a system overview to kind of show you the new features that you'll be having, and then hand you off to your support.
That's great. So like implementation is kind of like where the new data connection is put in place, validated, and then reviewed with the customer. So that would just lead me to the next thought would be, how long would a customer expect this process to take?
Yeah, so timelines can vary, kind of depending on the customer's environment and the complexity of the project. A fast track, for example, project, if it's a simple setup, a super clear timeline, minimal add-ons or integrations, we could be done within 2 weeks at the fastest. A more typical time, if there are multiple phases of the project or integrations like SSO queues, things like that, it could take a little bit longer, more complex project. So we could look anywhere between 5 to 7 weeks for that one. So it just does depend on the complexity and timeline in which we're making that migration.
Got it. I mean, that's pretty helpful and good to know. I mean, people kind of need to know that information. So if a customer should think in terms of weeks, not days, especially if there's queues, integrations, and phase migrations, or I guess multiple teams are involved. Well, I guess let's talk about things that can slow the process down. What are the most common roadblocks that can delay a transition like this?
So some common roadblocks usually come down to access to the phone system, timing and decisions that need to be made. So for example, if you were going to Microsoft Teams and doing a Entra ID setup for directory purposes, sometimes there needs to be some decisions made with the users having groups or licenses that need to be included in that Entra ID directory import. That could take some time just to make sure everything looks good and we're bringing in the right users. Sometimes, for queues, admin access to Control Hub and just making sure all the queues are licensed and syncing properly, and we're able to report on that could take some time. Security or policy requirements, things like that. So it does depend on, kind of the project, but I would say mostly, some of these items could slow down the project just a little bit.
No, yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, a good way to put it. I mean, it just really comes down to like access, timing, and then like the decision making process, whatever. So I guess once those pieces are handled and implementation is complete, what should customers kind of review after the transition?
Yeah, so after the transitions, we'll do some validation on our end, but customers can also do some validation. So making sure that the call records are appearing as they expect, making sure that the correct data sources are active. If there are queues, making sure that that data is showing as expected, and the queues are properly licensed as well. Checking any scheduled reports that may have been created with the old data source, and checking to see if any changes or modifications need to be made to that report to start looking at the new data, and kind kind of making sure that, the teams who rely on this reporting have access to the system, or at least we have reports that any admins within the system are able to provide. Customers will also notice that like I mentioned previously, the Teams and Webex data may look a little different, or some fields might be a little different than what they're used to with the Cisco or any other phone systems that they previously set up. So these differences could be within the call record details, the call types, available fields for reporting, the extension formatting could look a little different than what old data sources looked like, and the timing of when that data becomes available. So just verifying these and taking a look at it and familiarizing yourself with the differences is a great way to verify the data. Those differences don't mean that anything is wrong. In most cases, they'll just reflect on how that new system provides the data. But if something doesn't look right, customers definitely should raise their hand and let us know during the implementation process, just so we can properly investigate while the project's still active, just so we can make sure that once you are through that implementation process, you're set up for success and ready to go with your new system.
That's a great point. And I know, I've worked with your team members often with these situations, and they usually resolve them pretty quickly. So, and they're always really good at being on top of that kind of thing and helping customers understand those kind of nuances or whatever. So, I guess the goal is not only to complete the setup, to make sure that the customer has reviewed the new data and feels comfortable with what they're seeing in Infratel. So I guess that leads me to kind of like a recap session, kind of like a Q&A portion of this. So let's kind of talk about that. Let's talk about our kind of what we've talked about so far today. When an organization changes their phone system, Infratel needs to be updated so the data from the new platform can flow into the reporting, right? So customers can start the process by reaching out to ISI support, customer success, professional services, or just their general ISI contact. Sales will always be looped in to help scope out that transition. ISI also kind of needs to know needs to understand the current platform, the new platform, and as well as any migration timeline, directory needs, queue needs, and add-ons or integrations they might require. Implementation may include configuring the new Teams or Webex connection, setting up the directory, reviewing queues, verifying again that data flow is coming through, walking through with the customer like a system overview, and then a better understanding that timelines can vary, right? So, but for the most part, customers should generally expect about several weeks for the implementation process from start to finish, depending on complexity, readiness, admin availability, then so forth. And then after transition, customers can validate the data is flowing as expected, and then review any important reports or workflows that depend on the new data source, right? And so that's kind of, in my eyes, how I see the process. And it seems like kind of like what you've, for the most part, kind of walked us through here today. So, and it's always good to be able to kind of see that from, I always see the end of it. I always see what, customers, are working with the product, and we don't necessarily get to see from day to day, like, oh, we're going to be adding a new data source and this is the process. So I'm really glad that you kind of came here today to kind of talk and show us a little bit about that particular process. So Katie, as always, I don't work with you as often, but it was really great for you to walk us through this process. I know it's opened up a couple of eyes just working on this project with you, opening up some eyes, some things that I wasn't aware of. And your insight has really helped me gain a better understanding of what it is to put into transitioning to a new data source. So thank you for showing or talking to us a little bit about that today.
Thanks for having me.